Hello everyone, it's me, your average bonehead, Jay, and it's been a while since we've done one of these. Yes, welcome back to Character Skeleton. In this series, I give an analysis to any given character from any show, movie, or video game, as well as their overall journey, starting with an introduction of the character, their relationships with other characters, all of their major character development moments from beginning to end, and then I close it out with my final thoughts and what I feel the character represents. And today we'll be tackling our first main character of a show. Yes, I'm of course talking about the main character from the Disney animated TV series The Owl House, Luz Noceda.
I'm Luz Noceda.
Who is Luz Noceda? Luz is a 14-year-old human girl with an overly active imagination and creativity. Despite her outwardly happy and friendly personality, Luz doesn't have any friends and is often considered in school to be the weird girl. One day, after a book report gone wrong, as she accidentally released snakes into the class, trying to reenact a scene from her favorite book series, The Good Witch Azora, Luz's mother Camila is forced by the principal to send Luz away to a summer camp that will reel in her creativity and destructive tendencies. Even though you can tell both Luz and Camila don't want to do this, due to the fact that Camila actually likes Luz's out there personality. But unfortunately, they have no other choice. However, all of that changes when right before Luz is to get onto the bus to leave, she ends up seeing a mysterious-looking owl and follows it to an old house that takes her to a portal to the Boiling Isles in the Demon Realm. On the Boiling Isles, Luz's weird tendencies are a lot more widely accepted. Mostly. Due to the land's tyrannical dictator, Emperor Belos, there are laws in place to keep weird things out. But in a place like this, Luz can pretty easily blend in, or at least stay safe, especially since she quickly befriended public enemy number 1, Ida the Owl Lady, a wild witch who did not want to conform to any of the covens, and wanted to continue to study all forms of magic, which is why she's an outlaw. Ida takes in Luz solely for monetary gain, and agrees to be Luz's mentor in learning magic. After they escape the guards, they head to Ida's home, the Owl House, where they meet her roommates, Hooty and King. And after a prison escape, Luz ultimately ends up deciding to stay in the Boiling Isles to continue to learn magic. However, due to the fact that she's a human and not a witch, she can't naturally learn magic. Luckily, she ends up discovering an alternative form, glyphs, that give her access to light, ice, plant, and fire spells. Throughout her time on the Boiling Isles, she ends up meeting other witches around her age at a magic school called Hexide, and her helpful personality gets its time to shine as she ultimately helps her friends come out of their bubbles, face their fears, and become better people, even redeeming a few villains along the way. Ultimately, in the end, Luz ends up saving the Boiling Isles and is forever deemed a hero to them, and continues to go back there, basically living there forever. But now that you got the gist of it, how did we really get here? But before we get to that, let's take a look at another important thing for Luz. Relationships. Being the main character, Luz would naturally have relationships with basically every other character, so I'm only gonna really go into the ones she has major relationships with to keep things quick. Sorry guys. The first and most obvious person to talk about would be Ida. Ida took Luz in solely for monetary gain at the beginning. But as the series goes on, Ida takes more and more of a liking to Luz, to the point where it basically forces her to take responsibility and become a mother, which ultimately is why I think she was so willing to fully adopt King. Luz and Ida's relationship is a simple student-mentor relationship that ultimately turns more into a child-parent relationship, but it is nice and sweet to see. And speaking of King, with Ida taking the role of Luz's owl mom, King takes the role as her owl brother, or Titan brother. I love throughout season 1's the funny, wacky shenanigans these two always got into. We also see how much King really likes being around Luz in many episodes where King gets jealous of Luz's friends. The sibling bond is strong with this one. It's also kind of funny how Luz is single-handedly responsible for King figuring out each little thing about him leading up to him and us learning that he's a Titan. After that would be Hooty. Luz really doesn't have the most in-depth relationship with Hooty, as Hooty himself is kind of a running joke throughout the series, but we can't write off their friendship at all because Hooty is responsible for a very good thing that happens to Luz later on in the series. And I think everyone knows what it is. Overall, while simple relationships, the development that the Owl family ends up having, all because of Luz, is really sweet to watch. Because of Luz, all of their problems helped getting solved and they all got closer to each other. As they say multiple times, Us weirdos have to stick together. Moving on from the main members of the Owl family, there's Willow and Gus. I kinda put these two together because while their friendship is fun to watch, as well as the wacky shenanigans and Hexside adventures they all get up to, Willow and Gus's friendship with Luz is kinda sidelined as the series goes on. You can definitely tell it's still there and they're all so close to each other, but honestly I'd say those two were more important for Hunter's character development than they were for Luz's. But considering what happened to the show, it's kind of a necessary evil, and like I said though, it is still fun whenever they're together. Plus, Luz ultimately did help them a lot in the beginning, as well as them helping her, especially in giving her her first few experiences with Hexside. Also, speaking of Hunter, let's bring him up. Yeah, the obvious older brother-little sister relationship these two have is hilarious, as well as sweet when it comes to the moments where the two have to care for each other. As Hunter started off as a bad guy, Luz was the first one to see what he looked like in the episode Hunting Palisman, and from that episode, each member of the Hex Squad was able to work with Hunter in his redemption. But Luz was really important at the beginning, and very important at the ending of Hunter's development, especially since she was the only one of the group at the time to know that Hunter was a Grimwalker, and she was more than willing to keep that secret for him. Speaking of redeemed villains, now there's Lilith. Luz and Lilith only really have one major story together, but trust me, it was a big one, and I really like the cool Aunt Lilith dynamic those two have, which is equally sweet as it is funny considering Lilith bluntly tried to kill Luz on multiple occasions. And while we're on the topic of the bad guys, being the main protagonist of the show, Luz obviously has some form of dynamic with our main antagonist, Emperor Bellows, or Philip. The mind games Philip was able to play with Luz once he realized that she was the one who helped him is insane and really helps with Luz's development throughout the show, which we will get to. But on top of that, Philip works as a perfect reflection to Luz, where despite both being humans, he is the exact opposite of what she is. While she's caring and open-minded, he is heartless and closed-minded. Where Luz wants to help people that will benefit them, Philip wants to help people in ways that benefit him. And so on and so forth. It does make their final confrontation at the ending of the series really fun and interesting. Speaking of humans, there's Luz's human and biological mother, Camilla. Yesterday's Lie gave their relationship a really bad rap. As it turns out, Camilla is a really caring mother to Luz, which makes sense since they're all each other have left ever since her husband Manny passed away. As we see in Camilla's dream sequence, and thanks to them, the type of relationship these two really had, where Camilla did her best to make sure Luz's spark was never broken. And it really goes to show how good of a mother she really is. But unfortunately, it was the principal of the school that forced Camilla to have to send Luz away, which kickstarted the whole series. But even after all of that, Camilla never gave up on Luz, and it was because of her that Luz reached the peak of her arc, which I will get to soon. And then after Camilla, there's V. Unfortunately, Yesterday's Lie was the last episode written before the show was shortened, so it was obvious they had more plans with V and Luz, but as we saw and thanks to them, they never even interacted, meaning Yesterday's Lie was the last episode they really got moments together. And that sucks, because while the relationship in Yesterday's Lie was rocky, we actually see in Watching and Dreaming, through pictures on Luz's wall, that those two had a really close sister relationship that looked like it would have been really sweet. But, oh well, we can never have nice things. Now, let's move on to the character. Wait a minute. I feel like I'm forgetting something. Oh yeah, Amity. How could I have forgotten her? Now, what relationship did Luz and Amity have?
You always have a way of sneaking into people's hearts.
Why is this still so scary?
I don't know.
And today, I'll show Luz that I am an awesome girlfriend. I'm so glad my awesome girlfriend is okay. Me too.
Oh, crikey.
Yeah, even for a bit, I can't keep this up. Now it's funny, because when you really think about it, Luz and Amity have a very simple rivals-to-lover relationship that you would normally see in a lot of shows. In the first 3 episodes that involve Amity, while only one of them she was an antagonist, in the others she was more or less annoyed by Luz's existence, as each time Luz showed up in those episodes, something bad usually ultimately ended up happening to Amity. But luckily in the second of Amity's episodes, Convention, Amity realized that Luz actually is a really well-meaning person, and is trying her best. And after Amity's 3rd episode, Lost in Language, the two started to develop a friendship, and thus the Lumity ship began. This friendship was pretty quickly turned into Amity having a monster crush on Luz. And throughout the remainder of season 1, this was definitely one-sided. But then this moment in escaping expulsion happened, and Well, the rest is history. But on top of this adorable love the two had for each other, Luz really did help Amity out with a lot. Going back to escaping expulsion, it was because of Luz that Amity finally stood up to her terrible mother, allowing Amity to really become her own person, shown even further in the episode Through the Looking Glass Ruins, where Amity finally changed her hair. And then we get knock knock knocking on Hootie's door, where, like I said before, Hootie did something really good for Luz. Oh yeah, it was make Lumity canon, in the most adorably awkward way possible. But after the two got together, their relationship went from great to amazing, with them consistently being there and helping each other out with things. It also really helped Amity become an even better fighter. The two really were a perfect match for each other, and that's why honestly I think Lumity is possibly the greatest ship in modern media right now. The two just felt so natural together. Like a real relationship which didn't fall into any of those annoying romantic comedy cliches. When they had a misunderstanding and got into an argument, they didn't call it off there or anything. No, they actually listened to each other to figure out what was the root of the problem, and both wanted to help each other out. Like a real good relationship. Now I could go on about this ship forever, but we really gotta move on. This video is more about Luz than anything. And now, let's look at her character development. Character development. Luz has a nice upward arc throughout season 1, and then the finale happens and she has a nosedive downwards. And I mean this in the best possible way. You know, looking back, it's kind of funny that Luz ultimately ended up doing on the Boiling Isles everything that the camp she was dreading to go to was going to teach her. She got a lot more mature, took responsibility, learned patience, and got a lot of friends. Throughout season 1, Luz kind of remains the same, with her good nature, helping people out, but as I just said, she learns responsibility and patience, which was really useful when it came to her learning about the 4 glyphs. Despite doing the irresponsible thing and not telling her mother that she chose to stay in the Boiling Isles, everything was going pretty well for Luz. And then Agony of a Witch happened. This was the first moment where Luz's well-meaning naivete really came back to bite her in the butt and almost costed her someone she greatly cares about. In this case, Ida. In this episode, during a class field trip to Emperor Bellos' castle, Luz tries to steal a magical healing hat to use to heal Ida's curse, but unfortunately she ends up getting trapped. This causes Ida to have to come and rescue Luz and do battle with her sister Lilith, all while Ida's curse finally consumes her and fully takes over. Things do get better though when Luz heads back to the castle and manages to redeem Lilith after confronting her, and Luz King, Ida, and Lilith all manage to escape. Of course, Luz had to make a sacrifice and destroy the portal back home. More on that in a second. But as for the whole Ida and Lilith both being cursed now and not having that much magic anymore, both of them don't really hold it against Luz, but Luz holds it against herself. As we learn about this in the next episode, the season 2 premiere, Separate Tides. Yes, this episode is the true beginning of whenever there's a problem that happens, Luz ends up blaming herself for the problem, even if she ultimately is the one who manages to fix it and no one holds it against her. Throughout season 2, every mistake Luz has ever made so far in the series comes crashing back down into her face, and you can definitely start seeing it take a toll onto her. But one thing I do like is that they don't do it immediately. Throughout the first few episodes of season 2, while you can definitely tell things are different with Luz, she doesn't completely lose her cheerful persona, as seen in episodes like Through the Looking Glass Ruins and Knock Knock Knockin' on Hootie's Door. Both episodes ironically involved her being with Amity. In fact, a lot of the episodes where she's happy she's with her. But then the Luz guilt trip really starts when we get to Yesterday's Lie. So with the portal broken, the Owl family had to make a makeshift portal so Luz could go back to the human realm and finally be reunited with her mother to tell her that she's okay. Unfortunately, due to the unstable nature of the portal, she can't go all the way back to the human realm and is stuck in the space between spaces, and she can only communicate with people through reflections. It is in this episode where we are introduced to V, and the two go on a little adventure together. But then we get to this part where V justifiably calls out Luz for lying and abandoning Camilla, who was doing her best to raise Luz by herself. So then once V gets captured by Sonic the Hedgehog, Luz finally builds up the courage to talk to her mother again, and tell her everything that's going on. And then once everything's sorted out, Camilla finally tells Luz how scared she is about Luz being trapped in another dimension, but she is confident that they will find a way to finally be reunited. So it looks like the episode was going to end on a happy note. But then Luz ends up saying,
Yes, I've learned so much. Staying here was the best decision I ever made.
You chose to stay there?
Naturally feeling heartbroken that her daughter seems to not want anything to do with her, Camilla makes Luz promise that she'll come back and that things will be different. And Luz says yes to this. And this is also where Luz lying to everyone kicks in, because she refuses to tell any of her friends back on the Boiling Isles that she made this promise. Hell, Luz starts lying to herself as early as the next episode, Follies at the Coven Day Parade, where it turns out Luz misremembered what she promised.
When you come home, promise you'll stay here. I didn't mean to push you away. I swear things will be different. Promise me. When you come home, you'll stay with me, and you'll never go back to that place.
Throughout the next few episodes, this secret that she keeps from everyone starts really eating her up inside, especially when we get to the episode Reaching Out, where the episode takes place on the anniversary of her father passing away, and she can't spend it with her mom. So she tries using Amity's problems with her father to distract her from this problem. But in the ending of the episode, Luz is forced to confront this issue. But even after all that, she still refuses to tell even Amity what she supposedly promised Camilla. And yes, in general, the episode is heartbreaking to watch, but not as bad as Hollow Mind, where on top of learning that Hunter's a Grimwalker, this is the moment where we also end up learning that Philip is Emperor Belos, which wouldn't have been a big of a problem if it wasn't for the fact that rewinding back to Elsewhere and Elsewhen, when Luz and Lilith had their little time travel adventure, Luz ended up helping Philip find Enzo Gabriel. So Luz, in her own mind, is kind of directly responsible for Philip having the power to commit his mass witch genocide. And trust me, this definitely eats her up inside. Throughout the remainder of Season 2, the guilt of what she believes she promised her mother, and the fact that she believes she inadvertently caused the apocalypse, is obviously a lot to her, and that's when you really know the trauma starts kicking in. What is it with 14-year-olds and shows having to experience the most traumatic thing ever? The trauma continues to Clouds on the Horizon, where even though something really good happens to Luz, she still ends up feeling that since, at least to her, this is all her fault, that her friends should not be involved with the conflict, and she intentionally gets herself captured to go and fight Philip on her own. But in the very next episode, King's Tide, her friends do catch up with her and end up assisting Luz in her battle against Philip. But then King ends up freeing Enzo Gabriel, he one-shots Philip, stops the draining spell, and then starts terraforming the Boiling Isles to turn into his new playground. And after King sacrifices himself to make sure that Luz, Amity, Willow, Gus, and Hunter manage to escape back into the human realm, with the portal between the two realms being destroyed behind them and having no way to get back, the guilt and self-loathing onto Luz quadruples. Luz, accompanied by her friends, return to Camilla, V, and the Amphibia reference, and Camilla welcomes back Luz and takes her friends in. And thus Season 3 begins, and you can really see the toll this took on Luz immediately throughout thanks to them. This episode really hammers down how much Luz blames herself for everything that has transpired, to the point where she outright states that she is not going to go back to the Boiling Isles and permanently say goodbye to all of her friends that she made there, just so she doesn't have the chance of hurting them again. And that's messed up. All of this is evident due to the fact that Luz is barely with her friends throughout this episode. Granted, this is more likely just a time constraint thing. Season 3 is only 3 long episodes after Disney shortened the show for definitely non-homophobic reasons, so we didn't really have time for Luz to go on wacky adventures with her friends in the human realm, and that's what the montage at the beginning of the episode was supposed to show us, but closer to the ending of the episode it becomes more apparent. Naturally, nobody wants this for Luz, and Camilla definitely wants Luz to keep all of her close friends that she made, so they all obviously want to help Luz get through this. During the climax of the episode where Philip possesses Hunter, he ends up telling everyone that Luz is the reason why he even met Enzo Gabriel. And after they beat Philip and he returned back to the Boiling Isles, and Flapjack nobly sacrificed himself to save Hunter, Luz tries apologizing to everyone for what she did, but obviously none of them actually hold it against Luz that she was tricked by Philip. He's an irredeemable monster. Of course he's gonna trick people. If not you, someone else. And while all these words of encouragement from her friends and family definitely help, they don't fully solve the problem. That's saved for the next episode, for the future. Say what you will about this episode, but I think they handled one of the most important parts of Luz's entire arc throughout the whole series masterfully here. Even though everyone told her it's not her fault for Philip finding Enzo, Luz still blames herself for the horrible things that happened to her owl family, and the fact that all her friends can't see their family anymore. During the climax of the episode, where Kikimura chases Luz and Camilla out of Hexside, Luz ends up venting to her mother about how she's nothing more than just a big screw-up and causes problems for basically everyone she comes in contact with, which in a way kind of mirrors how people were treating Luz prior to and at the very beginning of the series. But then, as I said before, Camilla wins Animated Mother of the Year award as she's able to fully relate to Luz, not just in both of them being nerds who quote their series when it comes to life lessons, but also in the fact that Camilla knows what it's like to make a mistake that ultimately costs you one of your loved ones. And because of this relatability between Luz and her mother, Luz finally gets what she's always wanted.
To be understood.
And because of her figuring this out, she is rewarded with her palisman, String Bean. And while that's where you could say Luz's arc ends in the series, we still got one more episode to talk about. Watching and dreaming. Throughout this episode, after being reunited with the Owl family, Luz for the most part doesn't have to go through any major growth until after they redeem Enzo Gabriel, and Philip ends up turning himself into this unholy abomination, and Enzo thinks that he can redeem him. Luz ends up then taking the bullet for Enzo, and, well, doesn't feel so good, Mr. Stark. And then when she's back in the space between spaces, she ends up meeting King's father, the king of the demons, the Titan himself, Sans Undertale.
Oh, Titan.
Oh, me. Nice to meet you, Luz the human.
Yes, I'm making that joke again. Who obviously likes her due to the fact that she basically became the older sister to his son. And before he can give Luz the power to go back and kick Belos' ass, he ends up asking her this question.
But I can't give you anything unless you choose to accept it. So the question is, will you choose yourself?
Way back in episode 2 of this series, in the episode Witches Before Wizards, the show kinda made an intentional jab at Chosen One stories, saying that you shouldn't wait around to be a chosen one. And this moment is basically the perfect extension to that message. The only way Luz could be the hero to save everyone is if she chooses herself. No one else can tell her to do it, she has to be willing to. Which, when you think about it, is really similar to how Emmett beat Lord Business in the Lego movie. The only way for Luz to fully be the best her she could be is if she chooses to. And we kind of saw all this back in Hunting Palisman. Luz had yet to choose who she wanted to be, so she didn't get a palisman. Luz obviously says yes, she comes back with a cool transformation, the Owl family beat Philip, and the Boiling Isles are saved. And thanks to the epilogue that Canada definitely got to see, we see that Luz has chosen to continue studying magic, with 24/7 access between the two realms, and surrounded by all her loved ones and Tibbles. Luz is finally happy. And Luz's arc ends there. Bye! Final thoughts. Luz Noceda is a perfect main protagonist. I know, big revelation after everything I just said. But seriously, her arc so perfectly is intertwined with the main message of the show, it's honestly amazing. We see it all. She starts off happy-go-lucky, loses all of that through self-doubt, and then regains it with a new appreciation for all the loving people in her life. I don't just love her character because her and Amity's relationship is amazing representation. I love her character because of the message it teaches. You can't just go around blindly expecting to be a chosen one, but you also shouldn't bury yourself in self-loathing just for every mistake you've ever made. You will get nowhere with either one. The only way you can be the best you ever is to choose yourself. And while yes, this is something basically every main character in this show goes through, I find it is most effective with Luz because how hard we see her fall. So it just makes it all the more rewarding when she finally picks herself back up and chooses to be the best her. And that is why I think Luz is one of the most important characters in our modern media. Her character journey of self-identity is something I think any kid and teenager should see when they're growing up, so they can be inspired and understand what they need to do for themselves. And it's kind of funny when you think about it. Luz managed to achieve all of that, all because she was inspired by her silly fantasy books. But overall, I think anyone can agree that Luz has earned her title as the Good Witch.
I am the Good Witch Luz, child of the human realm, student of the demon realm, and warrior of peace! Now eat this, sucker!
And that's the character skeleton of Luz Noceda.
Just look in my eyes.